Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Maynard Public Library and our program featuring the author of The Artist and the Orchard, Linda Hoffman. My name is Jean McGuire, and I'm the director of the Maynard Public Library. It is our great pleasure to host a local author and one who is such a fine writer with a fascinating life story. Before I introduce Linda, let's go over how the program will run this evening. First, please be sure to keep your microphone muted throughout the program unless you are asking a question during the Q&A period. We're using the live transcription feature tonight, so attendees can view those captions if they wish to. Please note that the captions don't always provide a perfect transcription. Linda has kindly allowed us to record the program and make it available on our library YouTube channel later. You may have seen a notification in your Zoom screen alerting you that the recording was beginning. A link to the recording will be sent to attendees in a follow-up email over the next couple of days. Make sure that you are muted. We get an echo. Okay. So tonight, Linda will speak about her experiences and the process of writing about them, and she will read excerpts from The Artist and the Orchard, this book right here. Then she will take questions from the audience. You're welcome either to type your questions into the Zoom chat area at any time during the program, or when we get to the Q&A portion, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom. I will call on you and you can unmute yourself then and ask Linda the question directly. If you would like to purchase a copy of this wonderful book, you can do so at the library circulation desk by cash or check. It costs $20, and Linda has generously offered to donate 20% of the proceeds to the library. If you would like to reserve a copy before coming by to pick it up, you can send an email to the address which I'll put in the chat area shortly. Now, please allow me to introduce our speaker. Linda Hoffman is an honors graduate of Bryn Mawr College with a degree in fine arts. After college, she was awarded a fellowship to train in the No Theater in Kyoto, Japan, which she did for 2 years. Linda's interests in poetry and graphic art converged in 1981 when she created her first sculpture, a poem in cloth. She went on to further exploration of narrative sculpture using language, natural fibers, wood, stone, and found objects. Her work is held by museums and private collections, and her public sculptures are installed in towns and cities across the region. Linda was a founding editor of Wild Apples, a journal of nature, art, and inquiry. She is the author of 3 chapbooks of art and poetry and the letterpress art book, Winter Air. In 2006, 5 years after she and her 3 children moved into an old farmhouse with an abandoned orchard in Harvard, Massachusetts, Old Frog Pond Farm became the first organic pick-your-own orchard in the state. Now, with more than 15 years of experience growing organic apples, Linda teaches workshops and contributes to a holistic growing community. Welcome, Linda. I'm going to turn the spotlight over to you now. And the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Jean McGuire, for that introduction. I'm so happy to see so many people here. I do not want to see myself so huge. I'd rather see all of you. I love seeing your faces. And I'm very happy to be here. In fact, though we are not in person, we are safe and warm in our houses. We're not out slipping on the ice on a cold February evening, so that is good. I'm going to start with a quotation that is begins the first section of the book. And the first section is titled, "Where Are the Apples?" And this quotation was written by Liberty Hyde Bailey in 1922, so 100 years ago, in his book, The Apple Tree. The apple tree starts life fresh and vigorous. It grows rapidly. The shoots are long and straight. The wood is smooth and fair and supple. But in time, the difficulties come. The tree probably slows down. It becomes too thick of branches. The land is not tilled. It is not manured. Insects and fungi make headway. The tree becomes broken, diseased, gnarly, unshapely. And that is what happens when an apple tree is abandoned. But in a sense, I also felt like that is what happened to me, that I moved to this small farm in Harvard with my children at the end of a long marriage. And so this book is also, it's not only about the apples, but it is about, in a sense, making that decision, that large decision that sometimes we face to make a big change in our lives. So I am going to read, just to orient us in here, probably the longest section that I'll read is the first chapter, or most of the first chapter. And I decided instead of in the book calling them chapters, they are rows. And so in our orchard, we have 24 rows, and there are 24 rows in the book. Row 1, it's hard to grow apples. I was alone in an abandoned orchard and didn't know the first thing about growing apples. Holding a half sheet of paper, I read the names of varieties by row. Macintosh, Cortland, Red Delicious, Blushing Golden, and Golden Delicious. A few small green orbs dangled here and there, but I couldn't tell a Macintosh from a Cortland. Thorns on brambles snagged my ankles, while poison ivy and bittersweet vines spiraled around tree trunks. This was not what I expected in a New England apple orchard in July. The enormity of my new reality hit me. On a bright March afternoon in 2001, I'd visited A&M Orchards in Harvard, a rural town in eastern Massachusetts, about 45 minutes west of Boston. The real estate listing said, farmhouse with 5 bedrooms, a detached barn garage, apple orchard, and chicken coop. I wasn't looking for a way to get back to the earth or grow my own food. I was leaving a long marriage and looking for a home for myself and my 3 children. I would never have considered a small farm, but a good friend had urged me to check out the property. She had grown up here and loved this old homestead. Her parents had sold it to the present owners. I called my friend Roger, a local realtor. He questioned whether the property was a good match, but he said he'd meet me there. I arrived first and ignored the in need of paint clabbered farmhouse. Instead, I walked down the driveway towards the pond and a towering elm tree. All across America, these elegant trees had died from Dutch elm disease. And yet, here against the open sky, isolated from other elms, this tree was thriving. Its thin branches swayed, zigzagging their reflections across the surface of the water. The elm had been planted alongside a 10-foot-high stone dam. Water flowed from the large pond into a smaller one below. The sound of falling water reminded me of ancient Chinese Buddhist hermits doing ablutions under cold mountain falls. I was a little nervous visiting this farm property, but the mystery and uniqueness of the landscape stirred my curiosity. Roger and I entered the house. The front door opened into a spacious living room where a brick fireplace covered one wall. A brown sofa, a dark upholstered chair, and a wooden desk floated like atolls on the hardwood floor. Adrift among them, I followed Roger down 3 steps into the kitchen, where molasses-colored pine boards covered the walls and ceiling. In place of drawers and cabinets, open shelves held plates, bowls, and glasses. Along one wall, heavy pots for making jam and stock sat on the floor. Above an old-fashioned cast iron cook stove, a patchwork of blackened pans hung, their undersides crusty with use. On my search for a new home, I had already toured several houses whose kitchens boasted granite counters and sleek appliances. This farmhouse kitchen had a different feel. Its rustic patina was more my style. Roger and I continued our tour upstairs and peered into simple bedrooms. My children, 3 children, would each have a room. The master bedroom windows faced the raspberry patch to the east and wetlands to the south. 500 acres of conservation land owned by the United States Department of Fish and Wildlife. The master bath had 1960s avocado colored fixtures, a hue that made me want to look away. But my right hand reached towards the sink's hot water faucet, and I thought, if this house has hot water, it will be fine. I followed Roger downstairs and out the door. Is it all right to walk around the pond? Sure, go ahead. I'll wait on the porch. He didn't seem to relish a trek through March's mud and patches of old snow. I followed the contour of the water over a small stone bridge to the other side. That's when I saw a rock formation the size of a Volkswagen in the middle of the lower pond. It looked like a giant turtle gazing towards the rising sun. A dome boulder formed the body and a smaller stone shaped the head. My middle child, Nick, loves turtles, and for many years kept an eastern box turtle named Pebble as a pet. Friends and family sent him turtle mementos in ebony, teak, alabaster, jade, cloth, and corn husk from Russia, Guatemala, and Thailand. When he was a young boy, Nick taught me how to make stone turtles outdoors, choosing a large stone for a body, a smaller one for the head, 4 pebbles for legs, and a narrow one for the tail. We would leave these turtle totems in the landscape on hikes from the tip of Cape Cod to the summit of Mount Washington in New Hampshire, where we made a harrowing climb up Huntington's ravine together. I didn't know if the property owners had ever seen this turtle, but I took it as a good omen. I rejoined Roger and asked, "Can I see the chicken coop?" Walking into a ramshackle white clapboard shed, I teased away curtains of cobwebs. Slimy green chicken shit mixed with sawdust covered the floor. Some 40 old hens squawked, panicked by my presence. I breathed in the dust scratched up by their overgrown toenails. Later, I learned the rooster's endless mounting was the cause of the hens' featherless backs. What's going to happen to all these birds? I asked. Why? Do you want them? Why not? I thought, not knowing anything about chickens. Maybe. I'll ask the owners, Roger said. An orange tractor overfilled the other side of the chicken coop. Roger said, "This tractor comes with the property." I looked away. What was I going to do with this giant relic of a machine? My art background hadn't prepared me for driving a tractor. Near the coop, a rickety fence marked the wintered over remains of a kitchen garden. I had grown vegetables in small raised beds, but this sizable plot was a feed a family all year garden. Next came the detached barn garage where the owner had stored Model T cars. As a professional sculptor, I needed a space for my studio. The cars were gone. Only oil splotches on the wood plank floor remained. A few small windows let in light. My rusty metal objects, tools, and machines would fit. It wouldn't take much to bring in some heat. Where are the apples? The listing had mentioned an orchard. I didn't know what I would do with it, but I wanted to see everything. We crossed the road and walked down a narrow cart trail. The rows of old trunks and branches stretched out in wavy lines. The ground was bare. Persephone had yet to rise. "What will you do with the orchard?" Roger asked. "I don't know. It's hard to grow apples, and this orchard needs a lot of care." We continued walking down the cart road about a quarter of a mile until we reached a small clearing. I peered into a weathered shed. Earth-encrusted tools stood silently in their stalls like pterodactyls. I wondered if they too came with the property. Before I could ask, Roger had turned back towards the house. Apples figure in mythology, history, science, and religion, but they appear most significantly in art. Van Gogh painted rows of apple trees in blossom, their repetition of trunks lining the bucolic streets of Arles in southern France. Cézanne painted this humble fruit over and over again. His paintings of apples, some of the most memorable work in the history of modern art. He's even quoted as saying, "With an apple, I will astonish Paris." I was aware of this apple art history, but it didn't occur to me to wonder if the apple would make it into my art. I wanted my children to like the farm. Like tender seedlings, they had a lot to adapt to. Putting my own longing for happiness over keeping the family together left me feeling guilty and selfish. I was excited about the possibilities of the farm, but I also heard a chorus of voices intoning, "You can't do this. Forget it. You don't deserve this." I told a friend, "I don't know if I can manage such a large property." She replied, "Just do it." That little nudge was what I needed. Like a boat tipping over the falls, this rundown farm, A&M Orchards, named for the present owners, Art and Marie Spalding, would become our new home. That's the beginning. Oops. Did I just mute myself?
You're good now.
Was I muted a long time?
No. Just
Oh, good.
briefly. You're fine.
Okay, great. What I'm going to do is give you just a quick taste of the sort of challenge of apples. Meanwhile, I started studying apple care. Apples attract a lot of pests. So many, in fact, reciting them felt like the Kaddish, the Hebrew prayer of mourning. Codling moth, apple maggot fly, plum curculio, leaf roller, sawfly, aphid. The list numbered over 300 pests in New England alone. Apples fall prey to fungal diseases too: scab, cedar apple rust, black rot, brown rot, powdery mildew, frog eye leaf spot, as well as a dreaded bacterial woe, fire blight, that can kill an entire tree in one season. The Spaldings hadn't sprayed in 5 years. Health issues had forced them to abandon orchard care. An orchard where the trees have grown dependent on chemical fertilizers and insecticides doesn't do well on its own. Unlike wild apple trees, they are more like hothouse flowers. They haven't developed natural immunities to diseases and pests. The books I consulted presented the orchard as a battlefield. The solo orchardist is lined up against an army of insects. These books assured me that I was going to need to spray pesticides, and to do that, I would need to get a pesticide license. I found the prospect terrifying. I thought if only I could find someone to help me get started, someone who would do the spraying, I could do the rest, whatever the rest was. But this someone didn't exist. Caleb was someone that I met because I was over my head. I mean, you can imagine the grass was growing, and the weeds were growing, and the things were piling up at the dam. So I put in a little notice in our local paper, and one person replied. And so he said he would help out, just a couple days a week. So he came, and that he was a great help in. There were over 300 apple trees in the orchard, but 100 of them were dead. And so he could bring his chainsaw and cut them down. I then could cut them into smaller pieces. We had 5 huge pyres that we burned. I pulled a few chunks of good, interesting wood out. We to use as sculpture, and there was a lot. And so at one point, I heard myself say, Caleb, we're going to bring this orchard back, and we're going to do it organically. I started mentioning to people I was thinking of growing our apples organically, even though at that point I had no idea what this decision entailed. The reply I received was always the same. Oh, that's really hard. I simply stopped listening to the naysayers. The degree of difficulty did not change the facts. I wanted to bring the orchard back to health, and I wanted to do it organically. And I now had a vision I could hang on to. Maybe I was engaging in some magical thinking, but I was going to try. Even though I hadn't tasted one apple, I was determined to make it work. I needed to contact someone who grew apples locally. Calls to 2 of the neighboring orchards were discouraging. Each time, the person who answered the phone had no interest in speaking with me. Of course, they were busy with their own orchards, and I was a nuisance. Harvard is full of apple orchards. In retrospect, it was silly of me to even think of calling them, but I got up my nerve and made one more attempt. I telephoned Franklin Carlson, who, with his 2 brothers, owned the largest orchard in town. I drove by their farm on their way to take Ariel to her school bus almost daily. I felt shy about disturbing him, but I needed to talk to an apple expert. I needed to make this affirming first move. Frank Carlson answered my call and told me to come by. I jumped in the car and drove straight over. Only when I started up the Carlson Orchard driveway, hearing the noise of the gravel grating under my car's tires, did my resolve begin to weaken. Turn around. You're a pest. This is bad timing. In fact, it was true. Towers of crates filled with freshly picked apples were visible in every direction. Frank was a mini cyclone, answering his pager, cell phone, and loudspeaker calls. But he was kind, and he took time to chat with me in between answering questions coming at him from all sides. Frank, where do I pull the tractor trailer? Frank, when does so-and-so pick up? How many bushels? What block are we picking first? It was Grand Central at rush hour. I told him I purchased Art and Marie's orchard on the other side of town. I'm thinking of bringing back the orchard and doing it organically. Nodding, he replied, I'm familiar with A&M orchards. We don't grow any organic apples, but we press cider, organic cider, once a week. With organic apples I have trucked in from Washington State. I have to pay as much for trucking as for apples. I nodded. A small organic operation might work, he continued. Would you buy some of our apples? I asked. I could do that. I sensed in his response a sympathetic familiarity felt among anyone trying to grow apples in New England. Our humid climate makes it particularly difficult, unlike the dry air in Washington State, where apples are grown in a desert with little insect pressure. Though Frank and I didn't talk long, I appreciated his encouragement. So I want to give you just a little sense of a more personal part, because there are quite a few strands woven in this book. My own really personal resurrection came from or in tandem with bringing back the orchard. I left my own old life to end my suffering. but I didn't have an understanding of what I was seeking or where to find it. Do we really know what will make us happy? Or if we can find happiness and freedom in this lifetime, like a bee flying from blossom to blossom, we hope each flower we encounter will bring satisfaction. But sometimes our longing seems insatiable. The unhappiness that led me to leave my marriage made me feel at times like the women characters in No plays who wear Hanya masks, the ones with horns coming out of their head, women possessed by demons because of their jealousy or some other hungry ghost obsession. Could I find that elusive freedom I remembered from my young and independent days? What had happened to make me feel trapped by my life instead of boldly living it? For much of my life, art had been my place of refuge and connection with my deepest longing. But I was realizing this was not enough. There was still something missing, some question of who I really was and my place in the world. So I want to share one more kind of strand that is in the book, and that is I became interested in Zen Buddhism. And I first encountered it in Japan much earlier when I was there after college. But then I found this little book, and it was called the Ox Herding series. And it was a book that was a 12th century Zen master who was giving his students, his monks, a sense of the spiritual journey. And he used the metaphor of a farmer in early China who had an ox, and the ox was the farmer's most important possession because the ox is plowing the fields, the ox dung is warming their house, and when he's missing his ox, he can't come home without it. So he goes off and he has a whip and a tether in hand, going through brambles and up into the mountainside, searching for this peace, like we search for something ourselves that we're missing. And eventually he finds little traces like footprints in the mud. And so he knows that he's on the right path. So I, for example, had encountered this book. And then he catches sight of the ox. And that's quite incredible. But, you know, it's a fleeting image because the ox quickly disappears. And then gradually he follows and follows, and he's able to grab the ox with his rope. And there's this huge struggle. So they're struggling, and the ox can't be tamed and won't be tamed. But he perseveres, and he finally tames the ox until they can walk together. But he can't let go of the tether until the next stage, and he lets go of the tether. And then the ox and the person, can walk together. And then the next stage after that, you see the person sitting on the back of the ox. The ox is just going casually along, and the person is playing their flute. So it's just this beautiful metaphor, and I was quite taken with it. And so I looked up like the author of this book. And I discovered, so this is how I then persevered and came to the monastery. I discovered the author of the ox herding book was the abbot of Zen Mountain Monastery in Mount Tremper, New York. The monastery website featured a one-week retreat titled Wilderness, Art, and Zen, a camping canoe trip on Ragged Lake in the Adirondacks. Here was a retreat devoted to 3 things I loved, and it was scheduled for the week in August when the children would be on a vacation with their father. I had met, and this is, the book has maybe 10 years, so that this is a couple years, maybe that second year into my time there, and I had met Blaze, who is the man who became my husband eventually after another 15 years. And I had recently met him, and he said he would take care of the farm. Like, it was preposterous. I didn't know, like, why was I deciding I had to go on this retreat when I had this whole farm to take care of? But I just was determined, and there was just this 1 week. So I called up and I said, I'm calling to sign up for the wilderness retreat. Have you been to the monastery before? A female voice asked. No, I just found the retreat listed on your website. Then you haven't attended our introduction to Zen training workshop. No. Sorry, the efficient voice replied. You have to first attend the weekend workshop before you can go on the wilderness retreat. The next workshop is filled, but you can sign up for our July weekend. I can't do the July weekend, I said. I didn't tell her the apple maggot fly traps go up in early July, and the children, well, she continued, we offer the wilderness retreat every year. Isn't there some way I can go without doing the introductory retreat? I asked. No, there isn't. Are you sure? Uncharacteristically, I became a dog with a bone, and I wouldn't give up. Finally, the voice said, there's nothing I can do, but you can talk with a teacher. Call back in 10 days and ask for Shugen Sensei. I hung up the phone and wrote Shugen Sensei a letter, including in the envelope some photos of my sculpture. I wanted to do everything I could to persuade him to let me go on the retreat. 10 days later, I called Shugen Sensei at the monastery. No, he said, you cannot go on the wilderness retreat without attending the introduction to Zen training. Isn't there some way? I politely asked. No. Are you sure? Yes. I still did not want to give up. As someone who usually acquiesced to male authority and respected guidelines, I surprised myself by being so persistent. Trying to be strategic, I considered the matter from his perspective, wondering what is his concern. I tried a new tack. I trained in the No Theater in Japan for 2 years. I know a little about Zen. Zen isn't the issue, he said. I realized he's concerned. I may be afraid of spiders or may want to go home halfway through the trip. I love the wilderness, I said. I've climbed all the 4,000 footers in the White Mountains. I've summited Mount Rainier and climbed in the Tetons, and I've backpacked through Peru. All right, he said reluctantly, you can go on the wilderness retreat. Then he added, referring to my sculpture, by the way, I like your stuff. So the reason I just wanted to share that piece, which I've never shared in a reading before, is that so much I did continue going to the monastery when I could. And I learned so much there that I ended up bringing back. I feel like it was very influential in how I brought it back to the farm, because there is this camaraderie and an intention that the whole group held. And so I feel like the farm now, Old Frog Pond Farm, which I hope many of you will visit if you haven't before and live nearby, really became for me, like I was probably ready in some crazy way to actually just like become a monk and live in a monastery, but I couldn't do that because I now had tremendous responsibility and I had made this commitment to the farm and the orchard. And so I like wanted to bring everything I could here. So at our farm, we have outdoor sculpture, an outdoor sculpture exhibit every year, and we have plein air poetry, and we have this community now that has grown of artists and writers and spiritual seekers, and we have meditation 3 mornings a week. That's kind of that piece really informed it. So I've given you some bits and pieces of the book, and I want to end here and open it for questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Linda. That was wonderful, and I think did a nice job giving people a sense of how the book does go back and forth and forward and backward in time, and how there is the part of the farmer, there's so much practical consideration, all those insects and diseases and things like that that you're fighting, and cutting down branches, and then there's the more personal side and the journey, and how profound that is, and also sort of coming from an environment that you might say was rather controlled, not by you perhaps, and now you're in a situation where you are utterly in control, maybe more control than you even imagined at the farm. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit while we wait for questions from the audience to come in. Do remember, everyone, that you can enter questions in the chat area of Zoom, and you can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question directly. So could you talk a little bit, Linda, about that, the difference in control as you made this journey?
The difference in control. I'm not quite understanding that question.
Sort of, the difference in your life before and your life once you took on the farm.
So I think what's interesting, so Jean has read the book, and in the book, I was married to a man many years older than I, and a brilliant, sensitive man, an artist. His name was Paul Matisse, and he's still alive. He lives in Groton. And in fact, now, this is 20 years later, we are wonderful. We are wonderful friends. And he has a big sculpture at the farm. But as a young woman, finding my way, and then in a relationship with someone who was so many years older, a genius in his own right, from a legacy of art. His grandfather was Henri Matisse, the French artist. I was not able to grow. Like, I was kind of in this world that was his, and that was very difficult. And so I would say that I guess I don't feel like I control anything in a way at the farm now, because we don't really have control over much. Certainly not the insects and the weather and what's going on, but what I have learned, and that I would say is more through my spiritual practice, is that we do have control over our minds, just like that young man and the ox. The ox is not really outside. The ox is really our mind. And it's our own minds that we need to learn to control so that they don't go off and, do harm and say something that's hurtful and have us just get all confused and racing after something that actually isn't wholesome. So I don't know quite which control you were going, or insects or anything.
Probably more responsibility maybe would have been a better way to put it. And decision making. But no, you answered that beautifully.
So let's go then to another question.
Yes, you have. There are many questions coming in, and there are two that are on the same sort of topic. One is, how do you budget time for the farm and your art studio? And another person says, how did you work the writing into what must be a full and busy life at the farm and with your studio work?
So it's hard, but there are seasons with the farming. And so that was one of the things that took me a long time to write this book, because I could write in the winter and then I would have to put it away. Because you can't be writing a book and hold the book and just piecemeal go in and write a few sentences or something. I literally had to put it away, and then I would have to re-enter and get back into it and, hold it again. Winter is definitely the quieter time on the farm, and it is the time when I can do more artwork and writing. Yeah.
Another person asks, how large is your staff?
So everyone's part-time, except we have, as of last year, for the first time, hired a farm manager who is full-time, and then 2 or 3 part-time people, in the season. And we're doing that really just because both my husband and I are getting older, and we also are committed to following some other things. I'm certainly doing more art and more writing. Yeah.
A related question is, do you recruit interns through WOOF?
We've never had any woofers. And most of that is because we're just kind of not set up. Often woofers will come from other countries, and you need to be able to house them and feed them. And they, living out here, it's far away. There's no public transportation, so they couldn't get anywhere. And so we're not, so we haven't, but we've taken interns. We've taken, there have been high school students who have come to fulfill some kind of volunteer work project during their senior year. And we've had all kinds of different people who come through, work for even a year or two and go off, and college students. And it's been a great way to get to know them all.
Someone asks, what is your favorite season of the year?
Ooh, that's like asking what's your favorite apple. And to that, I always say the one that ripens next. So there is a chapter in here on pruning. I love pruning, and it is like sculpture, so I love that. But I mean, who's going to resist apples in blossom? And then how do you resist the little fruit as they start to grow? And then so that's very difficult. I think that by the fall, when the fall is over, it's a great relief. So it's kind of like loving every season. Can't say I have a favorite.
And here's another good question. How did your children adapt to this farming lifestyle?
So, I think my children definitely came to love the farm. It is my daughter, she was only 12, so she spent more of her life here at the farm than anywhere else. But they are not going to be farmers. They're doing other things. Yeah. One's a helicopter pilot in Juneau. One is has a pottery company in Asheville, North Carolina. And the best thing is my daughter, who lives in Watertown, is a sculptor, and she has some work at the farm, and we often work together.
Oh, lovely. The next person asks, do you have vintage or heirloom varieties? Also, any interest in producing hard cider? Do you sell apples to Carlson's?
Well, the year after, he actually stopped making organic cider because it was very challenging. So I don't sell him apples, but we have remained good friends, and I visit him several times in the season, and he takes me around and shows me his apples, and it's really nice to have that camaraderie. We do have heirloom apples, and we do have some cider apple varieties, which primarily we put in for the person who became our farm manager is really interested in making hard cider, but we do press fresh cider, and we sell fresh cider, but hard cider, that's just another like one. No, it's too complicated. So I'd rather, taste someone else who's devoted some time to learning how to produce a really good hard cider.
Okay, we'll do one more apple orchard related question and then move on to your writing. This person asked, do you graft your apple trees?
Yes, we do. I mean, I did in the beginning, but we do. And yeah, grafting is kind of magical. Like, it is amazing. Just to say to people who don't know, you can take a little twig, and this is a twig of first year growth that you cut like right now in February while the tree is dormant, and then you store it in your fridge. And that little tiny twig, as long as it has up one bud, you can mate onto either another branch of your apple tree. And you do that by making 2 diagonal cuts and a little whip and tongue, and then strap them together, and they meet and they grow together, and out of that little bud comes a new tree or a new branch. So we graft that way. We definitely graft. We'll buy rootstocks and then graft varieties we want. Also, I have a lot of friends now who are apple growers, so I can get interesting varieties from them. It's a lot less expensive, slower. I mean, then it takes more time. You learn patience as an orchard. Okay.
To talk a little bit about your writing, someone asked what motivated you to write the book?
I think what really motivated was the work in the orchard in the beginning. I knew when I started working in the orchard, especially I began pruning, that it was so, there were so many metaphors for our life, and it was so beautiful, this like pruning to let in the light and to let every branch, have light. I just started writing, and so that was really the beginning. I kind of knew that there was something so wonderful about it, and I've always loved to write, and would often write poems to go with my sculptures, and so it was a natural.
All right, a question I'd like to ask you about your writing, which I promised to try to phrase in a better way than I did my spontaneous question before, which is just, so having done poetry and narrative art and that sort of thing, what was it like moving into doing a full narrative and into writing a memoir? How did you find that process?
I found it super challenging. I mean, it's very different because the book you need. What I found most challenging was I had 20 years really of life that I was in a certain way condensing picking and choosing what was most important to tell the story. And yet I also needed a narrative arc to it, so that that the organization of it was most challenging, and but kind of thrilling when it finally came together. And I had a lot of help too, I have to say. I had some good readers and people who made some really good suggestions.
Editors you could rely on.
Mm-hmm.
To be
Yeah.
honest and have good suggestions. That's great. Someone asks, how can we reach out with questions? Is there some contact information for you or the farm that you would be willing to share, Linda?
Sure. Either way, you can go on the farm has, and all those emails are there, or we can put it in the chat
on a website.
Yeah, on my website, which is lindahoffman.com, oldfrogbondfarm.com. They both have.
Okay, great, thank you. And one last question about the apple trees. Of course, we're also intrigued. How long did it take to tame the insects and restore the apple trees? It's a good question.
So in truth, the irony is that the first year of our crop was one of the most beautiful. And I think because it was like the apple insects had forgotten about us, like they had left. And so then they started, more of them, came back once the apples were there. But I would say, actually, if that question was asked because someone wants to grow apples, that today, compared to 15 years ago, there are more like biological materials that are organic, that are available for even the homeowner to use, and that it is easier. I learned to have patience. I learned to see really when it was important, like we need to do something because we don't want to lose a crop. But when there's, for example, we have these red hump caterpillars who come, and it's okay. Most of them are, if they're in the big trees, it's fine. They'll eat some of the leaves, some branches. But if they're in young saplings, little trees, then what I do is I just go out. I know kind of the day in August when they arrive, and I need to just hand pick them. But we don't have to spray for them. So, there's this balance. Like there are organic pesticides, but I'm very reluctant to use them. What we want is a holistic orchard. We want a balance, a place of balance, so that nothing is, dominating, and that there's a natural. So those little red humped caterpillars, as they get larger, then the birds come and eat them, right? So you want that. And that's why we grow lots of different kinds of wildflowers and herbs under our trees.
Well, thank you for taking all of those questions, and thank you for giving us your time tonight, gracing us with your presence. And I highly recommend this book to everyone. Really, you'll just fly through it. You'll be so absorbed. It's beautifully written, and what a story. So I've put in the chat area information on how you can go about purchasing a copy. You can get it from the Loom Press website, and that link is in the chat area. We'll also put it in an email, a follow-up email to all the registrants, so you'll have that. And again, you can buy it also at the library circulation desk. And just to let you know also about a few other upcoming events at the library. Starting tomorrow, we'll have take and make Valentine's card kits available for all ages. So if you have been enjoying all those take and make kits that the staff puts together, you'll want to check that out. This Thursday, we have a virtual STEM program on patterns, which is for kids ages 5 to 12, and parents are also welcome. You can sign up for that through our online calendar of events. And lastly, next Tuesday night, there'll be another virtual program, which is baby toddler healthy sleep habits with an expert on that matter. It's going to be a Q&A, so you can ask all the questions you like. It's at 8 o'clock so that parents can attend after putting young ones to bed. So again, that's another one you can register for through our online calendar of events. And with that, we thank you for attending. Thank you again, Linda, and we hope you all have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you all for coming. And thanks again, Jean. What a pleasure.
You're welcome.